that to me is really the future, is the scientist will still be driving, okay, here's what I did in my experiment, right? Here are my hypotheses, but can we build AI agents to help answer the question, not just, okay, what happened in my experiment, but what is the kind of like underlying mechanism that is causing that to happen, right? So that you can develop new hypotheses off the back of that.
Welcome to Discovery Engines, a podcast on the people and the platforms who are accelerating scientific discovery. I'm your host, Nabil Laoudji. When it comes to developing a new drug or treatment, especially a small molecule drug, think of a pill that we might take for managing acid reflux or cholesterol. One of the things that I find fascinating is the difference between how much a drug like that might cost to develop versus how much it might cost to manufacture that drug. A treatment that might have cost hundreds of millions of dollars in R&D might just cost a few bucks per pill to produce. In that way, small molecule drugs remind me of software. Their value isn't so much in the intrinsic raw materials, but in the precise way in which those materials are engineered and put together. And what defines that arrangement more than data? The data on how that drug is absorbed, what side effects it causes, how it interacts across populations, and what its chemistry looks like. All of it combines into a kind of recipe that we take with a glass of water or whatever our pharmacist recommended for us. In this episode, I speak with Nicholas Larus-Stone, founder and CEO of Sphinx Bio, a startup that's helping life science labs automate the complex and often labor-intensive parts of working with scientific data. Among the many topics that we covered in our conversation, we dug into the reality of how scientists interact with data today, and yes, shout out to USB thumb drives, the challenges of building trust with AI-powered science tools, what AI co-scientists might actually look like in R&D, what an engineering mindset uniquely brings to biotech. And we talked about Bits and Bio, the vibrant community that Nick started at the intersection of software and life sciences, which I benefited from in the Bay Area. If you're curious about the future of biotech and data, or just want a sneak peek into how AI is reshaping how science is done, this episode is for you. Join us. Nicholas, welcome to Discovery Engines.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So when I think about accelerating life science and life science discovery, the first things that come to mind are things like these efforts to model a virtual cell, or folks who are building these biology foundation models. And those often get the headlines and sound really cool. When I then talk to scientists and see where they are spending their day and where a lot of their time is spent, a lot of it has to do with extracting data, making sense of it, visualizing it, communicating it, and so forth. And so one reason I'm super excited to chat with you is that you are the CEO and founder of a company that is squarely focused on that challenge. And you also have a unique perspective on this question as somebody who has a bachelor's and master's in computer science from Harvard and Cambridge, and also worked in the biotech industry before starting this company. So thank you for being here and excited to explore this with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I love talking about this. I think there's a lot of headlines around AI, and then if you actually dig into the details about like what AI can do for science, sometimes it gets lost with all the really interesting, cool advances, AlphaFold, Evo, ESM, but I'm personally very excited about AI for productivity, so excited to chat a little bit more about that today.
Great. Well, maybe starting off with the beginning. So you've got this great and strong academic background in computer science. What led you to move into and be excited about biotech, life sciences?
Yeah, actually, I was interested in biology first. So really liked studying biology in school and high school, and worked in a synthetic biology lab at UW. And so kind of got my interest in the biology side, did a little bit of programming on the side there, and actually programming some early languages to model cells. And then kind of fell in love with the practice of computer science and writing software. I also wasn't that good in the lab, honestly. Like I don't have the hands, as they say. And so kind of found myself at this intersection of the two fields where I like thinking about biological problems and working with scientists and thinking about science. But I like writing code and building software systems. And so that's kind of been my trajectory for the last 15 years now, is building software for scientists, working with scientists. And so for me, it was always studying the computer science, but then thinking how we could apply this to biological problems.
So it sounds like, in a way, computer science was a means to further explore and do cool work in your original interest in biology. What actually got you interested in biology then in the first place?
That's a good question. I think it's a combination of two things. One is it's intellectually very interesting. So just like learning about how cells work, it's like kind of it's an alien technology, right? Like mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, but like that was like an evolution many billions of years ago where we kind of absorbed like another organism. And so that just kind of always fascinated me intellectually. And then I think as I grew older, marrying that with the impactful work and, know people who are working on like climate to, engineer enzymes to recycle plastic, obviously a lot of therapeutics, right? Life-saving drugs. I think the combination of those two things is just, for me, the most compelling thing to work on.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day who was telling me, that a scientist, that the cell almost feels like a black box with a million black boxes inside of it.
Yeah.
So the ability to explore it is really endless.
Yeah, it's incredible how little we understand sometimes, but it's also just the practice of science is fascinating for me, and I think always has been. So don't have a better reason than that, but I think that's as good a reason to work in a field as any.
Absolutely. Well, so on LinkedIn, or maybe this is on your website, you talked about spending years building tools internally at leading AI drug discovery companies because commercial options were limited. So you worked at Octant and Benevolent AI. Could you maybe share a bit more for folks who haven't run across those companies before, what they do and then what you did at those companies?
Sure. So both of them are small molecule drug discovery companies, which means they're designing chemicals that can be used to help treat or cure diseases. So Benevolent, which is where I was first, was one of the early AI drug discovery companies. So I want to say 2012, 2013, sometime around there. They had this big insight of, hey, there's a lot of published scientific data out there. AI and kind of deep learning is kicking off. What if we could take those techniques and apply it to help improve drug discovery? So they were one of the early ones. When I joined, we were doing a lot of different things, everything from using literature to improve target identification, target discovery, all the way to designing novel molecules, so generative chemistry, as it's kind of known these days, to precision medicine, like what patients should we be dosing. I spent most of my time in the target identification group, so building tools to help scientists figure out, okay, in this disease, what are the actual proteins that we should be building drugs against? What are the pathways that are causing this disease? And so we built a lot of internal tooling. There's not that much commercial software that you can buy there. That's changing a little bit these days, but spent a lot of time there, and we really had kind of like a big pipeline of producing targets. So happy to go into more details there if you want. And then also built out some of the internal machine learning infrastructure just across the company because we were doing ML everywhere. And then I went to Octant, which was a much smaller kind of biotech startup when I joined, and their focus is on high throughput synthetic biology married with high throughput synthetic chemistry, meaning you can produce lots of different drug candidates and test it against many different receptors and variants of the same protein at the same time. And so that is both good from a drug discovery perspective, but also produces lots of data from an AI perspective. There, I was the first software engineer that they hired. So was building a lot of kind of like foundational data infrastructure. And I would say kind of like kick-started a little bit more of that thinking of, okay, we bought commercial products. We tried to buy software where we could, but a lot of it was too inflexible, right? And wasn't really built for like a small biotech startup, much more suited for kind of large process-driven pharmaceutical companies or larger biotechs, or wasn't really well suited to either the scale of the kind of high throughput workflows that we were doing or the kind of novelness of the synthetic biology and kind of shape of the data that we were building. So that was, I would say, a bit more of a wake-up call, because at Benevolent, I knew we were building very custom tools. Just the nature of the company was very tech-heavy. But going to Octant, where I was the first software engineer, they were getting along kind of up to a point without having any dedicated software resources. Kind of opened my eyes to, okay, actually, like most scientists in this industry are not working with large software teams and can't afford to build custom tools, and therefore have to make do with what's out there, which unfortunately, this is changing, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but unfortunately, a lot of tools for scientists are not very good, and so they end up either not using them, getting frustrated, or wasting a lot of time using kind of existing poor tooling.
There's a part of that which to me seems almost contradictory, where you have these organizations full of brilliant sort of engineering-minded folks working in industries that are often considered very high tech, and yet from the software side of things, it feels like the industry is a bit of a laggard. And I actually spoke to somebody in the biotech software space, and they said, in biotech, software has always been second. So what is that about? How did we end up here?
Well, I think 2 points here. One is, depending on who you talk to, actually biotech is very forward-thinking for software compared to other industries. So like the chemicals manufacturing industry actually has like much worse software than the biotech industry. I think if you compare biotech to, high-tech, right, software, yes, then the industry is lagging behind. But it's all a matter of perspective, right? And then the second thing is, you said, oh, this is full of engineers. Actually, I would say like the engineering mindset and the scientist mindset are very different. And so I think it's a recent phenomenon to have people coming in with more of an engineering mindset towards biology. For a long time, this has been a stated goal of being able to engineer biology. We're still not very good at this, to be honest. There's lots of efforts, virtual cells, large-scale foundation models, which are trying to make it easier to engineer biology. But, as you said, it's kind of a black box. We poke at it, right? We record the results and we come up with a new hypothesis. And that's a science mindset that's very different from an engineering mindset. And so I think that actually does lead to kind of fewer tools being built for this industry by engineers, just because there's fewer engineers who are aware of these problems. And the scientists, it's not their job to build software to solve these problems, right? You do see this, and there's obviously software here. There's been software here for many years. There's just much less of it than in the e-commerce industry and the rest of the tech space.
So as an outsider, you might say all of these folks are broadly in the STEM field and they think similarly and so forth. But when you actually peel back the surface, you find that the kind of maybe problems that motivate a scientist versus an engineer are different. And then maybe just their skill sets and their superpowers are different.
I mean, it goes even more granular than that, right? Like I'm saying scientists. There are many types of scientists. If you talk to a biologist versus a chemist, they have very different ways of viewing the world. If you talk to an in vitro biologist versus an in vivo biologist, they have different, right? Like you can go very, very deep into this. And so, yeah, I think from the outside, everyone with STEM is a little bit of a reductionist way to look at it.
I see. So what does an engineer bring to the table that maybe isn't sort of the natural move or trait of somebody who's in kind of the traditional sciences?
I think like systems thinking and building systems is a big part. And so the phrase engineer gets thrown around, biomedical engineer, automation engineer, software engineer. I would say like what's similar about all of those things is building kind of long lasting artifacts and systems to accomplish a goal. And so scientists are much more practiced in the scientific method, right? Hypothesis, test the hypothesis, update your kind of like internal mental model and like keep testing, which sometimes can involve building systems. Whereas the engineering mindset is like, well, I can't understand a system by just like perturbing it. That might be a useful debugging tool, but like I need to build a system. I need to be able to model it in order to understand it. And so I think they're just very different mindsets. And you see that in the way that people actually work together, but more and more companies are hiring automation engineers, software engineers. And so you're seeing more of a merging of this world. And I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but in my view, there's a little bit of the TechBio mindset is you're taking the engineering mindset, you're marrying it with the scientific mindset, and you're trying to get the best out of both worlds because neither one will really solve it on its own.
Well, we've been talking about infrastructure, especially as it relates to data within large organizations. One of the things that I hear is both, science is data starved. When we're trying to build these new models, we just don't have enough data sets, and we don't have the privilege of these, Anthropics and OpenAIs that can just scrape the web and, train these models. I also hear folks saying we are overwhelmed with data and we don't know what to do with it, and there's data everywhere. We don't even know where it is. So what's the true story here? Where are we?
Well, the answer is always it depends. No, but I think you see both problems actually, and you can see both problems at the same company and sometimes even in like the same problem space, where in most cases we don't have enough data. A lot of science that's done, a lot of biology and chemistry that's done is very low throughput, right? You're creating maybe a few dozen molecules a week and you're testing it. That's like a very small amount of data. Sometimes you can create really large data sets and, we can talk about that too. But like a lot of science that gets done is still very manual. It's one person doing something. And so, yeah, the data is actually pretty small. The trouble is sometimes you can do something in a kind of like, maybe you're only testing one thing, but you can do it in such a way that you get a lot of different measurements. So you sequence the genome of a single cell. You can get like a pretty large measurement from that. And when you scale it up to all the cells in a certain tissue, right? Like, okay, the low throughput is you have one tissue. The high throughput is now you have tens of thousands of cells and hundreds of thousands, millions of measurements. And so you can very quickly get really large data. I think this is what makes biological data actually really interesting and hard to build software for is you have to deal with both of those things. So the data shape is quite unique. You're not just plugging everything into Snowflake and querying it, right? Or just doing everything kind of manually and keeping it in your head. The last point I'll say here is even the very large data. So there is a recent single cell data set with 100 million different cells that were measured that was released. Large numbers. There's, I don't know, many petabytes of sequencing data out there. The problem is that's actually small in comparison to the complexity and dimensionality of biological data. So even when you have really, really large data, there's a ton of sequencing data out there. That's actually like still a pretty small amount of data compared to how complex biology is. And so I think that's kind of the fundamental problem is you have small data, you have big data, but the big data is still small in comparison to like what truly needs to be understood in order to engineer these systems.
Wow. So, what I'm seeing is there's like this universe of potential data that would hypothetically be available for the life sciences. And of that, we actually have a pretty small set, but each one of those data points has potentially a lot of depth to it and quantity to it. And so you can have both at the same time.
Got it, for sure.
So can you, one of the things you talk about is, you want to help scientists or, building a future where scientists can focus on science rather than data infrastructure or code. Could you maybe help us paint a picture of like what the state of the world looks like today for a scientist who is working with data? where are they spending their time? What are they spending their time on? And how time consuming is it?
Yeah, so the typical flow for scientists, and I'm generalizing here, of course, is plan out your experiment, go actually execute the experiment in the lab. Of course, that takes the majority of their time, is often actually just running the experiment. And once you've done that, you then need to figure out what happened in that experiment. And so that's really where we're focused, and where I would say like a lot of the wasted time comes in is, okay, I ran an experiment in the lab. Typically that produces some sort of output, some sort of measurement, because I need to understand what happened in order to, run the scientific method here. And so that's where these like data problems start to creep in. And so we see a lot of you physically go in the lab, you go to an instrument on your bench, and you plug in a USB drive and you drag often an Excel file, but some sort of output file or multiple output files onto that USB drive. You take it back to your desk, right? Plug it into your laptop. There are some solutions that are working to solve this. We'll all be happy when that happens. Hopefully there are no more USB drives in the lab. But that's kind of only the beginning of your problems. So now you have the data, but oftentimes that data is structured in a way that's not very friendly to analysis. So there's a lot of kind of like manual reformatting. We see a lot of people copying and pasting between Excel sheets within a single Excel sheet. And then there's also the problem of that often doesn't have all of your experimental context. So you recorded your experimental plan somewhere else, often in ELN, an electronic lab notebook, sometimes a Google Doc or an Excel file. We see it all. And so you then need to take that experimental metadata, that additional context, and bring it in alongside your results so that you don't just see that well A1 had this measurement, you know what was in well A1. So there's still kind of more data processing there to join those two things together. That's just getting you to a point where you like have a clean set of data, right, that you can start to look at. Then you actually have to analyze it. So depending on the experiment, you're usually making some sort of visualizations to do quality control, right? Did this experiment behave in the way that it was intended, right? Do my controls look good? And then you're typically fitting some sort of statistical model to your data to get a test of, okay, here was my hypothesis. Did my hypothesis pan out? So there's a variety of kind of tooling around helping you do that. You might write code to do that. Excel's not great at doing that type of thing, so there's kind of more specialized software. Of course, this Sphinx helps with this as well. And then you'll typically make even more visualizations off the back of that kind of statistical model and copy and paste that kind of final visualization into your slides that you then share with the rest of your team. And then you start that cycle again, right? So once you've said, hey, here's what happened in the experiment, here's why we think that happened, I'm going to now create another hypothesis and test that in another experiment, and then you kind of start the cycle all over again.
That's a lot of steps.
It's a lot of steps, yeah.
It's a lot of steps. Also, I'm remarking on the number of times I've heard the term USB drive or thumb drive over the last few interviews that I've done with folks in the life sciences. Clearly, they're making a comeback, or they're still alive somewhere.
Still very alive. I mean, I mentioned ELN, electronic lab notebooks. Some crazy proportion of people still use physical lab notebooks, right? So then you have like no digital record, which makes sense in some ways because actually it's easier to bring a physical notebook in the lab. That's what I did. But it makes it much harder to do anything on the back end where you want to do any sort of analysis, because if it's not digitized, then you can't. It's harder to use software to help you analyze your data.
So, if I'm heading up an organization in life sciences, I've got scientists who are going through that process. Am I, leaning on their training, maybe in previous organizations or in academia, to navigate that process well? Is there a team internally, which is like an internal, almost consulting agency that scientists can pair up with in order to do this kind of analysis? Am I just leaning on that new engineer that I hired, a la you, to create some custom software to help us navigate this process in a more automated way? What does it typically look like within an organization?
Yeah, so there's a range of things depending on size and type of company. I'd say when you're typically very small, you see a lot more emphasis on the scientists doing this themselves. So full stack scientists is kind of an emerging phrase of you expect the scientists to do everything from experimental planning to execution to analysis and write the code, build their own tools. It's a lot of burden, right? It works when you're really small. You can kind of keep everything in your own head. As you start to grow, that often doesn't work as well, and you might start to hire a computational biologist or maybe a team of computational biologists. And then you start to have kind of communication between the teams. So it's, hey, I just executed this experiment. Here's my data. Can you tell me what happened? So now you have this problem of, well, the computational biologists are typically not just answering your questions. They're building pipelines, they're doing other things. So now you're waiting for the response to your question. As you grow larger, you might hire people like me, a software engineering team, to build out tools to try and make it so that scientists can serve themselves, right? Self-service analytics. As you grow even larger, often you can't do that, and then that team might play a larger role in kind of managing commercial vendors to help come in and do this, or hire consultants for very specific tasks. So it definitely evolves as you grow as a company. But I would say, advantages, disadvantages to each of those styles. And then the other caveat I'll say is it also depends on the type of company. So more and more these days, we're seeing companies start with the concept that their data is really important. And so they might hire a software engineer or computational biologist even earlier to help build out that foundational data infrastructure from the get-go, because they know how important this data is. And that's, I'd say, a big shift, and is definitely something that we're seeing across the industry. And everyone does AI these days, right? And in order to do AI, you got to get your data in place. And so you've seen more and more of these companies start with a very kind of tech centric focus. This is where I would define what a TechBio is not just this engineering mindset, scientist mindset, but also actually like putting your money where your mouth is, right? And investing in the software and tooling in order to take advantage of the data you're generating.
I see. So kind of data first approaches. Sure. Would Recursion be a good example of a company that's fully embraced that?
Of course. I mean, they might say that they coined the word TechBio, but I think they're one of the early proponents of this, really from the get-go. Started a similar time to Benevolent, very AI first, very data first, right? And kind of just taking a very engineering mindset towards problems across their stack, right? And even their like phenotypic screening platform, right? Generating huge amounts of data, very automated, very ML driven, is, I think, a good indication of a company that is not just saying that they're investing in tech, but actually investing in that as like a core part of their like differentiation.
Well, part of our audience for Discovery Engines are fellow founders or aspiring founders looking to enter maybe the TechBio space. You had a couple of interesting roles at Octant and Benevolent. What you were observing clearly these pain points, partly of which you were hired to help solve, and I imagine maybe you started to see some patterns in industry like, this might be a broadly shared pain point. What specific event or time or thing did you see that was told you, okay, this is the time now for me to hang my shingle, start this company called Sphinx, and really solve this problem through this platform that you're building?
I don't know if there's like a single event. Part of it was I had started this community called Bits and Bio, focused on the intersection of software and science, and through that got to know a lot more people in similar companies and similar roles. And I think at some point it was just the accumulated weight of hearing the same complaints over and over again, and saying like, okay, well, why don't we do something about this, right? Why don't we solve this problem? Not just for Octant, not just for a single company, but across the whole industry. So I don't know if there's like one single event that precipitated it, as much as just kind of an accumulation of stories and meeting lots of different people with similar problems.
Okay, so the signal was getting high.
Yeah, signal was getting high, and yeah.
Okay, well, looking at Sphinx and maybe getting a bit more into your platform, a couple things that caught my eye when I was looking through your website is you talk about your platform helping scientists extract data, analyze it, including visually, discover interesting features within said data. So, I guess in the landscape of, or maybe the experience of dealing with data at a life science, company, why did you decide to focus on that specific part of the process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think two main reasons. One is there is a kind of more existing tooling upstream. So a lot of prior tooling focused around kind of digitizing notebook entries or registering samples and connecting to instruments and automating. And so there was just more software support there. And I think the kind of like other piece of that is it wasn't entirely clear to me that made a lot of benefit to the scientist's life. It was kind of additional work. It is important. Don't get me wrong, I'm a software person. I do believe in tracking the data, but it's not clear that actually makes the scientist's life better. And so in my experience, when I worked with scientists, the time that they were spending on the data munging, the analysis, kind of post-experiment, that was somewhere where we could speed up a lot and actually give them back time to ask more questions, get deeper in the data, run more experiments. And so it was where I saw the biggest need in terms of existing tools were super manual and not templated and not flexible enough. And we could actually do something that would accelerate their scientific journey, not just do something for the sake of it being good.
So all of the work that happens post-experiment, you saw, sort of a rich ground for you to contribute to. One of the things that caught my eye within that, brief description about your platform is, you talk about discovering interesting features within that data, and sort of a light bulb went off because ultimately the mission of this podcast is around, featuring people and platforms who are accelerating scientific discovery. Part of that happens, I think, as a sort of a consequence of just helping scientists do their work more effectively. But this seems to go maybe even a little bit deeper, which is, hey, this is helping us maybe bring some additional intelligence and sort of be a kind of a co-researcher with a scientist to see, is there a there that maybe we otherwise might have missed? So could you share more about what your intention is there and maybe what the state of that looks like today?
Yeah, so I think the first part is exactly what you're saying, is just improve productivity, right? I think there's a lot of benefits in doing that in and of itself. And then the other aspect is, if we can save you a bunch of time that you were going to do something manually, well, where are you going to repurpose that time? And so for us, part of that is, well, we want to support you diving deeper into your data, right? And if you were just doing kind of a cursory analysis before just to get to this one answer, can you now dig deeper and find an underlying truth that will save you an experiment in the future, right? That's actually a big benefit of supporting that. The other aspect that we've been developing more recently is kind of what you're alluding to with the co-scientists, co-pilots of the world, is we've been building more AI agents to help answer those questions on your behalf and answer kind of not only the question that you have, that first question, but see if we can go deeper. And I'd say it's still early days, right? Models are still getting better. But that to me is really the future, is the scientist will still be driving, okay, here's what I did in my experiment, right? Here are my hypotheses, but can we build AI agents to help answer the question, not just, okay, what happened in my experiment, but what is the kind of underlying mechanism that is causing that to happen, right? So that you can develop new hypotheses off the back of that. Mm-hmm. So I'd say that's still early days for us. We've kind of spent the last couple of years really trying to help on that productivity front, and we will continue to do that. But I think that is where the future is going, is having systems and tools and agents, assistants, whatever you want to call it, to answer the questions that you don't even know that you should be asking.
As I hear that description, I was at JPM at a bunch of events, including in the digital health space, and tools and platforms that help doctors with diagnoses and radiologists and so forth. And there seem to be, and this has been around for a while, definitely tools that help, for example, radiologists look at scans maybe more quickly and give them maybe a heads up if there's something worth investigating here. I think that's now even moving into, having, for example, a doctor have multiple sources of the patient's data and be able to, again, not provide the, recommendation for a surgery and just have that happen, right? But ultimately maybe kind of give a little notifier to the doctor of, hey, there's something that might be interesting for you to look at. So I feel like what you're describing is taking that same sort of maybe thought or capacity and bringing it forward into the scientific kind of discovery domain.
Yeah, and maybe a concrete example of this is most scientists are very good at looking at the data from their most recent experiment, which makes sense, right? You just ran this experiment, you want to figure out what happened. But oftentimes, you actually will get a deeper understanding of that data if you can look at that in the context of either the several past experiments of the same type that you ran, or maybe all the experiments you've ever run. But that's really time consuming, right? And it's hard to set up the data infrastructure in order to support that, right? Which is why most companies don't do this, right? Most scientists do that. It's just too hard to do. But what we're building and where we see the future going is anytime you ask a question, that should be contextualized in all the data that you've generated, right? You spent millions, sometimes tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars generating all this data just to look at it once and never look at it again. Now, a lot of that data might not be helpful, but I can tell you for a fact that we see lots of examples where if you could look at all of that data, you actually would make better decisions and kind of save yourself a lot of time and money in the future. And so I think that's really where some of the kind of like specialness of kind of existing generative AI solutions and future generative AI solutions come into play is, being able to answer those types of questions that are just too hard to answer today.
I love that idea, right? If I am a scientist, I've been working for 15 years, maybe there's an experiment that I did 8 years ago, which I've just lost track of because each one of my experiments is, mentally challenging and has a lot of information, and we naturally, forget things. For that data point to somehow be brought up again and help, come up with, the next hypothesis that's more informed and more interesting.
And it's not magic, right? Like there's lots of institutional knowledge that's lost when someone leaves, right? But there's also a lot of data that is there that can be useful. And so until we can even answer these questions, we don't know how useful this is. My hypothesis is actually a lot of this data could be useful to you. Not all of it, right? It's definitely not 100% utility, but I do think companies are going to be able to get better use out of their data and operate more efficiently and be able to hopefully bring drugs to clinic faster.
So, Sphinx, as again, I've understood it and I played around with the platform a little bit. Its superpowers right now are really in helping you sort of extract data, make sense of it, visualize it. You said there's the sort of bleeding edge, which is early days, but you're helping scientists figure out what interesting features there might be in that data set. What is powering all of that? We talked about AI agents, LLMs. What's under the hood of it? Is it a call to an OpenAI API? Is it some new version of DeepSeek that you've trained for yourself, insofar as you can share?
For sure, yeah. So I think one thing to mention is you can use our platform without any AI features. And so there's a lot of hard work and software engineering expertise that we've put into building a platform that is easy to use and helpful for scientists. Now we're kind of marrying that with more AI features and building these agents on top of it, which are typically a complex series of calls to a number of different model providers. In our case, we've found that different models are better at certain things, and so we just use the best model for that specific task. I think it doesn't make a ton of sense for us to train our own model right now. That's like that's kind of like the job of OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and a few of these other providers. And so we use kind of just best in class models. And then I would say like our expertise is in building the robust software systems and like functionality around those LLM calls to make them actually useful, right? Because as any scientist who's probably tried to type into ChatGPT and say, hey, what's like a good like target to go after Alzheimer's? Well, okay, like it'll spit some stuff back to you, but that doesn't make it useful, right? And so I think that's the biggest gap that I see between what should exist and what we're building and what most people experience is it's not just an LLM call, right? It's not just typing something in ChatGPT. If you want to get a lot of use out of this, it's actually building a complex software system around all of those LLM calls.
Well, you mentioned earlier, it's the job of the OpenAIs to train the models themselves. I've seen, for example, there was an announcement, I think in the last couple of months from OpenAI about a partnership they have with, I think, Retro Biosciences, where they have this kind of bio model. I think it's still internal. There was a post by the CEO of Anthropic, Dario Amodei, a few months ago, where he talked about sort of the future of AI. And I think he himself was trained maybe as a neuroscientist or in biology. So a lot of it had to do with both, some of the potential dangers, but also just kind of excitement around the way in which these models could serve kind of the science community. I'm curious, like, do you feel as you look at these larger model companies, a la Meta, Anthropic, and so forth, to what extent are they really prioritizing training these models for scientific applications? And and kind of what's behind that insofar as you can tell?
Yeah, I will distinguish between I think it was like GTP4B, which OpenAI trained with Retro, which is one of those biological foundation models, more similar to AlphaFold, Evo, right? Kind of very focused on a specific set of biological tasks, as opposed to Claude, ChatGPT, right? The more general purpose Gen AI models. I think most of those foundation models, with this notable OpenAI exception, are focused on the general purpose models. And so they will continue to make those better. There is obviously a big gap between those two, and there's a number of companies working on the biological foundation models, and we'll continue to make those better as well. And then I think there's kind of an interesting marriage between the two of, can you have the general purpose LLMs orchestrating those specific foundation models? And that's kind of my prediction of what the future looks like if you really want to build AI scientists. But in general, I think the general purpose like LLM providers, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, will just continue to make their models better. And what they've found is making them better at science and coding generally translates to being a better overall model by a certain set of criteria. And so I expect them to get better and better. I don't think it makes a ton of sense for them to train a specific model on, feeding in a bunch of DNA sequences isn't going to make the model better at many other tasks, whereas making the model kind of smarter and more human overall will make it better at scientific tasks, if that makes sense. So that's kind of my take, is you'll see even more of a bifurcation with these very general purpose LLMs and these very specific bio foundation models, and you'll have some interaction between the two. But I don't see a future where you're training just like one model that can like spit out, DNA sequences and answer your question about, designing a new plasmid.
That makes sense. So could you share a bit more about how you are leveraging, these models for the actual kind of work that your platform does for scientists?
Yeah, so we've been incorporating these models into our platform for a while now. We released an open source package like a year and a half ago called Plate Chain, which was just kind of some simple prompt engineering around helping scientists extract plate-shaped data, so from their files. And that was kind of some of our early work. We've incorporated in a number of parts of our application to help make visualizations, help tag data sets to organize later. I think what we're most excited about right now is this future of agents performing work on behalf of scientists. And so we've been building a part of our platform where scientists can ask a question and have an AI agent go off and do a complex analysis for them. So, hey, I just ran this experiment where, I ran 10 plates. Can you help me find what the hits were? Okay, well then I can go make a cup of coffee, come back, and I have like a detailed answer of, hey, look, your controls were wrong on this plate. The hits look like they're these 3 compounds that you want to follow up on. Looks like those were not hits in an earlier assay. Maybe you should check that out, right? So I think that's the future is ask complex questions, get complex answers in a couple of minutes as opposed to, a couple of hours or days or waiting on another team to give it back. So that's kind of our main focus right now is can we build the best, computational coworker for you where you can get answers within minutes instead of hours or days.
Well, one of the sort of caveats that you have, maybe this was on your website, you say, as with any LLM application, it's impossible to guarantee 100% accuracy. If you encounter any sort of problem with a specific file type, please file an issue. And I think what that, to me, maybe pointing to is a challenge that all of these models have, which is things like hallucinations. Can you share more about, how you manage those and, as somebody who's providing and creating a product, how you balance sort of the power of these models with some of their kind of maybe weaknesses in hallucinating under the general umbrella of building kind of a trustworthy product for your end user?
Yeah, that's why I think it's very important that we've built an entire software system that operates without LLMs as well. And so when we have these agents working, we still produce artifacts that a scientist can investigate with their own eyes. And so we're not just saying, take our word for it, like it's right. We're saying, here's the conclusion, here's the result, and look at all of the steps that we took, and you can investigate it with your own 2 eyes, and we'll give you proof and visualizations that help guide you to agree or disagree with that final conclusion. So I think that is the only feasible way is you need to show your work, right? I don't think scientists should accept just like AI is magic and it's going to tell you the answer. I don't think scientists do accept it. They tend to be much more skeptical than most people. And so for us, it's the combination of the two that is very important.
Great. Well, I want to get more into sort of the business of TechBio, but before I do, I guess, is there anything else that I haven't asked about the platform or what you're building that you'd want to share before we go to that section?
Yeah, I think my pitch is whether or not you use Sphinx or want to use Sphinx, a lot of scientists that I've talked to tried ChatGPT when it first came out. And they had concerns about hallucinations, and they asked it their favorite question about their favorite target, and ChatGPT was wrong and like made stuff up. And so my pitch would be, things have moved a lot in the last 2 years. Give it another try, right? And I'm not saying it's perfect. There are still hallucinations. It's still not a great target identification tool for you. But there have been a lot of advancements and a lot of systems being built around this that make it really useful. And so that's my pitch is give it another go.
Awesome. And I signed up for a free account, at least to be able to play around with it. For folks who want to sign up and give it a go, how do they do it?
Yeah, so you can go to sphinxbio.com and sign up for a free account with some limited features there. If you want to bring this to your team, your lab, your company, you can also just reach out at hello@sphinxbio.com, and I'd be happy to set up a personalized demo.
Okay, super easy.
Yeah.
Good. Well, so let's get into the business of building a startup. So besides, helping to engineer the product, right? You wear many hats. One of them is you got to make this thing work as a business and scale up as a business. There are clearly some very, I would say, clear benefits to humanity of companies like you succeeding. It's also a tough industry. I hear things. I was in Cambridge a few months ago, and they had advertisements all about biotech winter. There are companies that are kind of darlings of this space, or at least considered, like Benchling, which I heard had a round of layoffs a few months ago. So, I'm curious, like how, when you're looking at sort of the landscape and the potential for startups to build businesses in this space, like what advice would you have for other founders?
I don't know if you should accept advice from anyone, but I would say it's definitely a tough time in biotech right now between like lack of investment for the past couple of years, kind of like rising competition from China is something you'll hear a lot about. It's tough to be a biotech company. Now, we're not a biotech company, we're a software company who sells into biotechs. But that also means biotech companies might not be thinking about buying software. So they should, for many reasons, efficiency being one part of it. But yeah, that definitely makes it challenging. So I would maybe just say, again, I don't know if this is advice, but it is a tough environment, but like our view is this is really important, right? So like you're always going to want to have new drugs, new biological products, right? Agricultural advances to help feed more people. And so, yes, it's tough right now. Biotech is a bit of a cyclical industry. It's pretty risky. And so it's very affected by like financial markets. But I believe, the team believes that biotech is a really important part of today and the future, and so it'll come back. And so then part of your journey as a startup is, can you build something that is useful enough and valuable enough that people want it, even when it's a tough time in the rest of the market? And I'm not going to say it's easy. I think it's a challenging space to build in, but it is really important work.
When I'm listening to your perspective, in my previous life, I was a tech salesperson for a SaaS platform. It was in the collaboration space, and part of our pitch would be, here's all of the new products that we can help you get to market more quickly and bring in more revenue. But especially when the economy wasn't doing as well, we'd go to the other pitch, which was, hey, if we can help you collaborate more efficiently, we can, help you increase your productivity. And, maybe in some cases that helps your team kind of continue to stay lean and be able to create more things. And so if you've got maybe products that serve the biotech community that can help them sort of do more with less and help scientists sort of be more efficient with their time, I imagine that's aligned with their maybe kind of like, belt tightening initiatives.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say it's challenging because people will often see software as a cost center, right? It's spending how much, per year. But then if you think about the alternative, which is every scientist of yours becomes X% less efficient. And how much are you paying those scientists? And how much does it cost to run an in vivo mouse study? And that gets delayed by a week because you didn't, realize that your timelines were off, right? Like those are costs that are a little more hidden as opposed to just like, oh, we're paying the software vendor. And so obviously this is my pitch, I'm biased, but the pitch would be, there are a lot of really big costs in biotech, salaries, actually not even being the largest one, but like capital expenditures for experiments, reagents, all of that. And so if the software can help you be, even a little bit more efficient or prevent you from making an experimental mistake, then it probably pays for itself in very short order.
Well, in terms of kind of other folks entering the fray, so we talked about the big companies, building these foundation models and general LLMs. One of which is, Google DeepMind, and they've got Gemini. They, a couple of weeks ago, released what they called an AI co-scientist, a multi-agent AI system built with Gemini 2.0 as a virtual scientific collaborator. So clearly folks are really paying attention and excited about this space. I'm curious, and, as somebody who, is operating in a similar space, what do you make of sort of Google's interest in this kind of building an AI co-scientist?
Yeah, I mean, Google as always, has several initiatives. I mean, Isomorphic Labs is their drug discovery arm, which is producing a lot of really interesting work. AlphaFold 3 is the kind of one public thing that they've released, but they have a number of collaborations. DeepMind, right, had this really interesting paper on the co-scientists. I think everyone kind of sees the importance of building better tools for scientists and speeding up the scientific method. You mentioned Dario's post on a potential future where these LLMs can accelerate scientific discovery. So for me, that's all really exciting, right? Like, we all benefit when scientific discovery is accelerated. Now, I think, like, from a practical perspective, that paper's probably not getting deployed in like biotechs to have a co-scientist. It's a great paper, but there is always a gap between the paper and the actual deployment. And so I'd say that's where companies like us come in, and we spend a lot of time working with customers and talking to scientists about their day-to-day problems and trying to build solutions off the back of that. So I do think I obviously think there's a market for companies like us to help the biotechs of the world and eventually the pharma companies of the world take advantage of these tools. And I hope, Google keeps publishing interesting papers on this.
Absolutely. Google seems almost notorious for that, where I feel like they have their hand on the pulse for these really interesting innovations very early. But then I think where they stumble is in really like productizing them and making them available. I think one recent example of that is like Notebook LM, which blew my mind when I used it a few months ago. But it feels like it's kind of fizzled out, and I'm just like, come on, like this, you've got a gem here, right?
Yeah, I mean, great product, and now everyone has their own deep research product variant on top of it. But yeah, they had Notebook LM for over a year, right? And so I think part of it is just Google's so large that any products that aren't kind of like massively impactful are hard to prioritize, right? And so even something like an AI co-scientist, which has the potential to be really impactful to humanity, is unlikely to have a billion users, right? So it's not going to be on the scale of Google Search or Gmail or any of their other products. And so I don't see them prioritizing that in the same way that Notebook LLM kind of fell off, even though it was a magical product and actually had a pretty decent user adoption.
Wow. That's a good reminder. I'm imagining there's probably some mantra on somebody's desk where it's like, if it's not $1 billion business, we don't want to hear about it.
Yeah, I don't remember where I heard this, but it's the idea that Google only invests in toothbrush products. So it's like something you do twice a day.
Oh.
So like if you're not doing something twice a day every day, they don't care about it, right? And so, Gmail, you're on your mail all the time, right? Calendar, you're always checking your calendar. Android, right? You're always on your phone, right? Like if it's not that, it's not going to get prioritized.
Wow. Well, in the scheme of different AI models, we talked a lot about sort of these general purpose LLMs. You mentioned the distinction between them and the AlphaFolds of the world. It seems like you dipped your toe into this space with Folding Playground. So as I looked at the website, this helps you figure out which folding model to use for a specific research problem. Was that sort of just like a fun skunkworks experiment? Is this an integral part of your tool, or sort of a hint of where Sphinx is going into the future? Could you share more about that?
Yeah, I'd say it's a part of our startup journey, right? There's sometimes some offshoots that don't lead anywhere. So that was one of those where we launched it, but decided it wasn't a good business model for us to go after. But I do think there's still a big gap between the models that have been developed and the interfaces that make them accessible to scientists. And so Folding Playground was our way of both making these folding models more accessible to scientists, but also trying to help answer certain types of questions around what type of model is best for my specific problem, because everyone's scientific problem is slightly different. And so just saying AlphaFold is best for everything is not always true. And so that was an interesting experiment. It didn't turn out to be a good path for us to go down, but I think someone should be building these things. I don't know if it's a company, but and there has been some, I think, continued innovation in this space, and hopefully there will be more. I think in the kind of medium to long term, again, you'll have these general purpose LLMs, these agents that are making those decisions or at least recommending those tools to scientists and then actually like running them and executing them. So the interface might look quite different. It's no longer, just looking at 3D structures and kind of selecting the models. It's telling a different LLM, hey, I'm trying to, dock a molecule into this protein. Can you fold this protein for me?
Well, I think one thing I found interesting about that playground that you built is this idea of being able to, pick and choose between different models that are out there. It reminded me a bit of Perplexity's approach in, when you go to that website, you can choose whether you run the query on, DeepSeek or OpenAI or Anthropic and so forth. And I remember they got a lot of, in some ways, flack for their website. They said, oh, you're kind of just a simple wrapper company and, you're one of many sort of wrapper companies. And then I think with the sort of DeepSeek moment that we all went through a few months ago, there's a new perspective, which is actually these foundation models are to some extent the new commodity. And really the wrapper is where you develop a sense of kind of loyalty with your customer base and where you really add value to the customer base. And so, there potentially is an argument for why they're going to continue to stick around as an organization. And so I thought it was cool to see maybe a much more technical version of a Perplexity that you guys had built for these protein models.
Yeah, I would say like wrapper is often a pejorative term, and it shouldn't be because actually building the product is the hard part. I mean, you could say in some ways ChatGPT is a wrapper company because there's a lot of brand loyalty to going to ChatGPT, even when I don't think they had the best models at certain points. And so, it just goes back to showing that like building a useful product and building brand loyalty around that are still important even as the models underneath change. And so our philosophy again is like we will use the best models to solve the task, and we're going to spend a lot of time working with scientists to make sure we can solve their very specific problems. And we want to be the best in the world at solving those problems. And you're not going to get the same experience just putting a few lines into ChatGPT.
Well, I don't know if I would call this a useful product, but maybe it is a product. The community that you've built of Bits and Bio has been super useful for me as somebody who's a new entrant into this space. I feel like when I go to one of the many events around San Francisco, I'm constantly meeting people who've just moved to the city who are having the same experience of just very easily being able to plug in, meet other founders and professionals from South San Francisco here, the kind of biotech hub. So first, personally, I want to thank you for.
I'm glad you're enjoying it.
For
That's
planting
awesome.
the seed. Absolutely. I'm curious. That's been a journey for you. I'm imagining that right now, as a founder, this Sphinx Bio is probably your primary source of attention, and I know you've got folks like Shantanu and others who've done a great job of sort of carrying the torch. Where do you see Bits and Bio kind of unfolding in the next maybe couple of years?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have a great team that's running Bits and Bio right now. So Sphinx is definitely my main focus these days. But I think we've just seen like a massive amount of interest and growth in Bits and Bio over the past few years, almost entirely organic, which just kind of goes to show that there was a big need for a community and forum to discuss these types of issues that we've been talking about. And so I expect the community to continue to grow. We have some plans this year and next year to expand to more cities, more events, more types of events. We'd like to do a podcast, in-person conference, but the goal still remains the same, which is helping accelerate the adoption of software within the kind of larger bioeconomy. And so I think that problem will not go away, and we'll still have a lot more work to do in the future. But the goal would be eventually that like it kind of becomes obsolete because it's just so obvious that of course you're using software to accelerate scientific discovery and in all parts of scientific discovery that do you really need a community and organization that is focused on this? I think we're a ways off from that goal. So I foresee Bits and Bio being around for a future. But I think at some point it would be great if it's just a given and no longer like a specific need or something that's special.
Well, one question I like to close with all the folks that I speak with is, we've got an audience of folks who are, investors and policymakers and, from industry. How can our audience be helpful to you on your journey at Sphinx?
Yeah, so, first of all, if you're a scientist, try our platform. And if you work at a company who's struggling with some of these issues that we've been talking about, definitely reach out. That's probably number one. Number two is if you're looking to get into the space, come talk to me. We are hiring software engineers. So, even if you don't have a bio background, but you're kind of curious about what it's like to work in bio, would love to talk. Love to talk about roles at Sphinx or elsewhere. And then I think the third is support your local scientists. It's tough times for many reasons right now. And so I think just like making sure we're all in this together will be an important part of the next few years.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for not just sharing your story, but also for, as a founder, working on establishing and growing your own company, but helping a lot of other founders do the same through the other community that you've built through Bits and Bio. So I'm personally grateful for it. I know many others are who are, I'm sure, listening to this. So again, really appreciate your time today.
No, appreciate you for having me. Thank you.
For sure. Very welcome. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of Discovery Engines. If you want to have more information about our conversation and show notes, check us out at discoveryengines.co, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.